He joins us now on the Oakland County Megacast. Mr. Dickerson, thank you for joining us.
You bet, Tyler. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How's your family?
Everybody's good and safe and healthy, and that's the main thing.
That's always good to hear. Let's just face it, it's baseball season. Whether the players are playing in the ballpark, whether a single pitch has been thrown or a single strike or ball has been called, this is baseball's time of year. What have you been hearing most recently from your inner circles within the major league community about the potential for the season to begin?
Well, I think it certainly goes back and forth, doesn't it? You hear about the proposals that have been offered from the players or the owners to the players, and now the players will counter offer. I think we're going to have baseball this year. I think this is a negotiation that is unlike any other. It's not your typical collective bargaining agreement. It has so many more elements to it, and they've got to work through these things. But I think there is such a strong incentive to start, and especially, man, if you could start July 4th weekend, what a thing that would be. And so I think they're going to get a deal done. It doesn't look, there's a lot of back and forth right now, but I think there's such a strong incentive, both financially, but also just as a sport, to make sure that you don't miss an entire season and all the implications that go with that. And the idea that baseball could also help heal the country and certainly give people something to enjoy, listen to, watch during the summer months is big. And I think baseball will figure it out. And I think we will have baseball. It's not easy. You have to emphasize it. And you know all the discussions. I mean, just listening to Chief Baker there about, all the things that they deal with on a daily basis. It's not going to be easy, but it can be done, and I think it will be. And I'm hoping we'll start sometime in July.
That would be amazing. Like you said, to start on a date like July 4th with the opening day. What kind of celebration that would be? That would be absolutely incredible. It'd be our normal opening day in Detroit is its own special holiday. Imagine a holiday within a holiday. That would be just absolutely fantastic. And you mentioned in your most recent comment, you mentioned how much of a rallying point that baseball can be in our community, and how sports can be a sort of rallying point as we continue to fight this issue and we come out of this issue.
Right.
And I think about the last time that we lost sports for an extended period of time, or any really period of time, at least in my memory. And I think back to the immediate aftermath of the September 11th attacks. And even though that was more of a temporary delay and baseball was only out of commission for maybe a week, when it did come back, we had these little small moments like Mike Piazza's game-leading home run against the Phillies, and like President Bush's first pitch at Yankee Stadium. When we do come back from this, do you see a renewed passion, a renewed meaning of the game from the player's perspective, knowing these guys as they return to the ballpark for regular season games potentially?
Yeah, and it's the frustrating part will be they won't be able to show that passion and the joy in the return of baseball, at least in person. So, hopefully baseball gets creative with ways to, I don't know, you see ideas about having watch parties and having people finding ways of gathering together at the same time online to enjoy it together. That's what sports is all about, bringing people together. So I hope I'm sure they are thinking of creative ways to bring people together, because that's what it's all about. Like you said, it's a collective experience, and that's what makes the return of a sport, in this case baseball, which I think holds a different, I don't know, it seems like it holds a place in the hearts of this nation more than maybe any other sport. And I love all sports, but it really could be special. And but the difference will be, obviously comparing it to then, is that it will not be able to be done in person, and you're going to have to get creative to find ways to bring people together in acceptable ways during a pandemic to make sure they all enjoy it.
Dan Dickerson, so great to have you on the show with us today. Thank you so much for being here. And Erica Jones here. We've been hearing a lot in the news lately about players, and salary cuts that they're facing. And, different reactions to that. And I know there's been some controversy on that. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how some of these major league players are reacting to these potential salary cuts that they're facing for the upcoming season?
I don't want to get into the middle of a dispute between owners and players about salary. I'll just say this. There are some, when you see a Max Scherzer on the 8-man committee helping to advise the union leadership on what players are thinking, just be aware that's one of the good guys in the game and one of the smartest baseball players I've ever had the pleasure of being around and getting to know. I mean, he's just a smart guy. And so, again, I mean, the players have legitimate concerns. The owners have legitimate concerns. There are millions and billions of dollars at stake here. I think that reasonable people can come to a solution. I've read a lot about it. Again, I'm not going to weigh in on either side, but I do think there are ways that this could get done that would be fair to both sides. I mean, it's something we've never dealt with before. There is no template for how to deal with this. But I think there are good people on both sides. But I don't know, when I see that Max Scherzer's on that committee, it just makes you think, okay, let's listen to what he says. If he has reasonable concerns, let's listen to that because that's a really sharp guy. And again, owners have legitimate concerns about cash flow and money. So let's see if there can be a deal worked out. I really think there will be.
The owners have to be able to fund the parks, and the players have to be able to get their due as well, playing a full or a partial season and make what money that they're going to make as much as they possibly can, comparable to what they'd be making in a regular full season. So there's always going to be that balance there, and it gets chippy initially, like any negotiation. But like you're saying, I see that reason will eventually play its course in here, and we'll find some way to get back to this, because ultimately the owners want people to be watching games, buying merchandise, go into the ballpark if it's safe to do so, and the players, you go back to when they're playing t-ball and when they're playing Little League. They love this game. They want to get back on the field. And do you see that desire ultimately being what maybe brings them to that reason?
Yeah, I like I said, there's so much money at stake that I think they'll figure it out, because it's going to be better, let's face it, to play a season than not play a season. And getting to your point about players wanting to play, it is interesting. I mean, I think they are such competitors. It's going to be weird to not play with fans in the stands. Let's get that out of the way first. That's going to be very different. But these guys are competitors, and they don't play just because there are fans in the stands. They play because they're competitors. They want to beat that other team. And I think you will see it will be different, but you will see a good brand of baseball because these guys like to play the game. They miss playing the game. I don't think any of them can picture not playing it for an entire year when they're playing it at the major league level or the minor leagues, and that's a whole nother story. So I think, because I do think fans, I wonder, how's it going to be without fans in the stands? You're still going to see a good brand of baseball. These guys are competitors. Someone said, hey, there'll probably be more trash talking that you'll actually hear and be ready for having to delay a little bit. So I think that part of it is going to be, it's still going to be fun to watch.
Oh, it's going to be fun one way or another. And I do like that perspective that you provided of the potential not having fans in the stands to bring in some more extraneous noise and take out that trash talk. And it will be interesting to get more of I'd like to refer to it as an NFL film special perspective into what we're seeing. You see all that trash talk as they're mic'd up later on, years later, as you're going through these historic games, but you don't really hear that a whole lot in the actual broadcast. That would be really interesting, at least from my perspective as a fan, to experience as well. Baseball is in some ways or another maybe back this summer, but one issue that is presented are various states' requirements and the regulations. Particularly in Michigan, Governor Whitmer has said very recently on another local radio station, quote, "There is reason to feel some confidence here, but we also have to temper the reactions and say life is going to be different. We are not going to be filling stadiums this fall." With that being the case, in Michigan and in other states that have professional baseball teams and may not be able to put fans in the stands, you see that a situation where you could be in Arizona playing the Diamondbacks and they have some fans in the stands socially distancing, but in places like Detroit you have an empty stadium? Or do you see more of a situation arising like the NHL is talking about, where they may have some hub cities where baseball is being played, where fans may be allowed in the stands in a certain capacity.
I don't see the hub cities. Everything I'm hearing is that they're going to try to play in home ballparks, which I think is probably the right thing to do. I mean, what's right and what's wrong?
Right.
That seems like a good plan, put it that way. I think you're not going to have crowds at Comerica Park anytime soon. I do think you might have a patchwork that some ballparks in some states, some cities might allow a certain number of fans in. I've already seen that I believe it was Texas governor, who said that they're going to allow 25% capacity. I'm not sure how they came up with 25%, but again, everybody's trying to figure out how many people can you safely get into a ballpark, socially distancing, physically distancing a certain level apart. I mean, the more you read, the more we're finding out about this virus is it's very much in terms of transmission about events being held indoors with prolonged contact, whether it's a workplace or whether it's a social event. A choir practice where everybody was trying to do the right thing, but because of the enclosed space, many members of that choir, I believe it was in Washington, got ill from that. And that was back in March. So the more we're finding out, outdoor events are better. And if you're apart and there's no prolonged exposure to somebody, right in front of you, then I do think that, we're learning more, that it becomes possible as the season goes on, as we learn more about this and how it's transmitted, that you'll have some fans in the stands. But you're right, it could be a patchwork city to city until, each state decides what it's going to do in terms of allowing gatherings of more than 25 or 50 people.
There's no doubt that things are going to be different, and it is going to be something we've never seen before, and hopefully after this process is eventually coming to a close, we never see again in baseball and in life in general. Things are going to be different. It's going to be kind of odd as we get the ball rolling on this, so to speak, but it's still going to be baseball, and people want baseball. The players do, the fans do, the broadcasters do. We're all looking forward to it in some way or another. Dan Dickerson, the Detroit Tigers radio network play-by-play announcer, joining us on the MegaCast. One change that is potentially coming to baseball in this scenario is the potential of the designated hitter being both in the American League and in the National League. How do you see that changing the dynamics of the baseball season going forward?
I've been advocating it for a long time, so I'd be thrilled if that was the case. Whether it would be temporary, probably would be, because the National League is still very resistant to having a DH. But I think for this year, because you're going to have probably more interleague play, it looks like right now you're going to keep the 6 divisions, but keep the Central in the American League playing themselves, so the other 4 teams in your division, and the other 5 teams in the National League Central, same with the East and the West. And I think because you're going to have more interleague games, higher percentage, that's probably why they're talking about the DH in both leagues. I don't think it changes a whole lot. I mean, to me, when we go to a National League city and I have to watch that pitcher bat, and it's just hopeless and helpless, and a good hitter hits, a good hitting pitcher hits about 180 or 200 with no power. So right. I just, I'm done with watching pitchers bat. And you can say it takes a lot of the strategy out of the game, but you can look at both sides. And I'm not sure that it really does. Jim Leland always made the point, it's much harder to decide when to take your pitcher out in the American League than the National League, because in the National League, if you're behind by a run in the 6th inning or 7th inning, you're going to lift that pitcher. If he's coming up, you're going to lift him for a pinch hitter. Oh, yeah. American League, you really have to figure out when are you taking that pitcher out based on performance and who's coming up and where we are in the game. So he says actually in the American League, it could be tougher, more strategy, more decisions to be made by the manager that are tougher than in the National League. So and we're not going to miss the double switch. It just doesn't. It doesn't really apply to too many games. So I don't think it would have a major impact. And to me, it's going to have more interesting at-bats versus that automatic out that's at the bottom of the lineup. I just never really appreciated that. It's just, you can take all the strategy arguments you want, but I'm tired of watching pitchers bat.
Oh, the strategy element of it is definitely interesting. How do you bridge that gap from American League to National League? But much like you, I'm also very much in favor of the National League taking on the designated hitter, because there's no reason to play a baseball game where one team's at home in a regular game playing against a team in the American League that they're also in the league with, and have 9 batters, and then all of a sudden they go out west, or they go into the Central States and they're playing in the National League, and all of a sudden they can only have 8 batters. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's time, and maybe this will finally be what draws that change across the league. So Dan Dickerson, just a couple more minutes with you here on the MegaCast, the Detroit Tigers radio network play-by-play announcer. You've been around the league for a bit. You've had communications with legends who've been around the game and seen the history of this game develop, like Ernie Harwell. And in a time like this, in this unprecedented moment where baseball has been in some ways lost up to this point, and maybe back in some capacity, and not all is lost, but we've lost a lot so far in terms of the sports season. In terms of the historical perspective, from the stories you've heard from your colleagues in the industry and from what you've experienced in your career calling baseball games and covering sports, does this compare to anything, or is this in the past that you've experienced or that you are aware of, or is this completely in its own different echelon?
Oh yeah, you can't compare it to anything, because when you realize that it took 67 pages for Major League Baseball to try to address just how they're going to keep players safe going through one typical day at the hotel, at the ballpark, at home, you realize this is unlike anything we've ever experienced. There's nothing to compare it to. The longer we're in this time, the more we are learning about how complicated this virus is, the impact that it can have on people long term. We're learning more and more. It's a process. We're learning more and more about how it spreads, and we can use that information hopefully to keep people healthy. But it's so complicated to try to keep these athletes healthy and expect that all of them will abide by these pretty severe restrictions. I think Major League Baseball did it, they worked with experts. They maybe went overboard in the eyes of the players in terms of how restrictive their interactions are going to be, but they did that to show that, hey, we're trying to do this in the right way so that you guys stay healthy. And I think the players are going to push back a little bit, and that's okay. I think from the league's perspective, if the players want to say, hey, we want to be able to have more interactions in the clubhouse in a safe way, how can we do that? And I think there are some indicators and indications in recent weeks that it's the length of time, again, face-to-face in a closed indoor setting that matters most. Maybe you can relax some of those things that Major League Baseball came up with. But again, when you see 67 pages just to address every possible scenario, and there are still unanswered questions, you realize this is like nothing we have ever seen. There is no normal to go back to, and it's going to be a new normal that everybody has to kind of get their brains around, and that's a process. That's a big deal.
Talking to Dan Dickerson, the Detroit Tigers radio network play-by-play announcer on the Oakland County MegaCast. And as you've heard Dan Dickerson say many times in Tiger baseball broadcasts, we're going to take a very brief pause for station identification. We'll stay right here, though, to do that. You are watching us on Civic Center TV and Birmingham Area Municipal Access Television, and listening to us on the radio on 89.3 WBLD, Orchard Lake, West Bloomfield, Keego Harbor, Sylvan Lake, 88.1 WBFH, Bloomfield Hills, that's 88.1, The Biff, and 89.5 WAHS, Auburn Hills, WAHS 89.5, Avondale Community Radio.
I think it's safe to say that every player, every team, it's, the ultimate goal while you're, in the league to win a title and get a ring and everything that's associated with that. So how do you think, the players or even the teams that were serious, I mean, it's serious for everyone regardless of where you stand, but, teams that were more likely to, make it far to the playoffs and everything this year, do you think that they're more discouraged, or do you think this will make them work even harder than they would have before in those positions?
You just talk about the impact of the virus on the league going forward and those particular teams?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to me, a shortened season, and let's go with the current plan of 82 games. I know the players would like it to be closer to 100. Whatever it is, a shortened season is going to me, bring a whole lot more teams, especially when you expand the playoff field to 14 out of 30. You're going to have a lot more teams in this thing, and it could get really interesting really fast. I mean, it's, by the time if you start in, let's say, July 4th, by the time you hit August, that always feels like, the beginning of the kind of the sprint toward the end, and certainly September. And in mid-August, you're not even going to be in the halfway point. So it's going to be fascinating to me to see what teams jump into contention, how teams, because there aren't going to be the traditional minor leagues this year. There doesn't appear to be, there will be any minor leagues right now. How do teams with prospects that are close to the major leagues keep those guys sharp so that maybe they can make their debut some point during this season and make an impact on a race? 42-40 could probably make the playoffs this year, or 43 or 44 wins, a little above 500. They're bound to be. If 14 out of 30 teams are going to make it, teams just a little over the 500 mark that are going to make the postseason, I wouldn't count anybody out. And a team like the Tigers, who have Mize, Manning, and Skubal, three really top of the rotation prospects, that's their future, assuming good health. These are all legit prospects that the nation, from coast to coast, evaluators say these are all top 50, if not top 30 prospects in all of baseball. They can have a big impact in a short season. And a team that was expected to lose a whole lot of games this year suddenly could make some noise if those guys debut, and let's say they're working out of the bullpen in short 3-4 inning stints, or they're piggybacking each other in the rotation. However they decide to continue their development, if they don't get at the minor league level, let's say it's at the major league level in a different role. There are many scenarios where a shortened season could turn non-contenders into teams that can certainly make some noise and fight for one of those 14 spots. So whether it's a contender or a non-contender, I think you're talking about a whole new, there'll be great motivation. I think the teams that focus on how can we take advantage of this situation versus, there are so many restrictions on this isn't as much fun as it was when there were fans in the stands. The teams that embrace it, okay, this is the new normal, and we're going to embrace it, and we're going to go out and show that we can win some games and maybe shock some people. Those teams might be the ones to keep an eye on, that have good young talent, that have the right mindset. And while the other ones maybe are still complaining or worrying about the conditions they have to play under, some others might just sneak up.
We've seen youth movements work in basketball. It's worked in other sports because these guys can stay healthy a lot longer and have a lot more energy than maybe the older players for later on in the season. With the Tigers having a manager like Ron Gardenhire, who's been notoriously great with young players throughout his career, and veteran presence like Miguel Cabrera in the clubhouse with these players, that potential for continued growth, especially in an expedited season, a potential for a playoff environment experience, could be huge for the Tigers going forward into the near future.
Remember, you added 4 guys on this Tigers team. This is why I was so excited for the season to start before all this happened, just because I really wanted to see what's the impact on a team when you add, it was 4 free agents, 5 total, but 4 that came from teams that won 100 games. Romine and Maben from the Yankees, Scope and Crone from the Twins. That's not the norm. I know these were big name free agents. They're all 1-year deals, but you added 4 veterans to a team that really needed that infusion of veteran presence and knowledge, to a team that had a whole lot of inexperience last year and obviously lost a whole lot of games. The talent is still on the rise. You're going to add some talent from the minor leagues. Those guys last year, some of them are going to get better this year. There's something to work with there, but to add that infusion, I really wanted to see, and I'm looking forward to still seeing what the impact of those guys will be, because that can oftentimes, we've seen this before, teams that are learning how to win, that can have a huge impact, and it can speed up the whole rebuilding process and the development of certain young players. And I thought that was going to be a real important and intriguing aspect to this season. I wasn't going to put a win total on this team, because who knows what could happen when something like that happens. I mean, remember the 2003 Tigers jumped from 43 wins to 72 wins. I mean, this team could have easily gone from 47 in a normal season to the mid-70s, given what they had done in the offseason. So now in a shortened season, especially if you start adding the Scoobles and Mises and Mannings of the world and maybe a position player or two, and with those veterans who are going to be a big piece of this, I really just almost anything could happen. Remember the Tigers 73 games in, the year they lost 98 a few years ago. They lost 98 in back-to-back years, but one of those years they were 36 and 37. So 73 games in, they were one game under the 500 mark, and then the rest of the season happened. But that gives you a feel for what might happen in a shortened season. It can be a very different look than what would happen over 162.
A youth movement, high-level prospects, veteran experience coming in, and a high-caliber manager. Things are definitely looking up for our Detroit Tigers. Dan Dickerson, Tigers Radio Network play-by-play announcer. Anything else you'd like to say before we let you go?
No, I just you're going to hear a lot about the back and forth between the players and the owners. I just think I go back and forth every day on when we're going to get this started, if we'll get it started. I feel strongly we will get it started. They'll figure it out, and I do think. I don't know. It seems like July 4th is such a perfect restart. You have to get some things done pretty quickly if we're going to get to a July 4th start, because there will have to be at least 2 or 3 weeks of spring training to get players ready. But I think we're going to be playing baseball in July, and I can't wait to start bringing baseball games to fans. Even if they can't be there, I can't wait to bring games to fans real soon.
Neither can we. We thank you so much for giving us your time this morning to speak with us. Dan Dickerson, Detroit Tigers Radio Network play-by-play announcer. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome. All the best to you guys.